Hello and welcome to Coding with Stephen. Today we're going to be working through one of our JavaScript challenges called Find the Largest Number. Before we get started, there's a link in the video description just to the GitHub repo that contains all of these tests, and it will also contain a bunch of instructions on how to get yourself set up so that your development environment looks exactly like mine, so that when you're following along, everything looks the same for you as it does for me. What we'll do, we'll get started. We'll find the largest number challenge within the basics folder, and we'll just run through the instructions just to see what it is that we're going to need to do. So we know that we're going to have a function called find the largest number, and what we need to do is ensure that the function returns the largest number in a given array of numbers. For example, for the argument of 1, 100 and 1000, it should return 1000 as that's the largest number. And we've also got a handy test command here that will run the tests associated with this challenge, so that once we've completed the code, we can actually see if that's going to be working as expected. So what we'll do is we'll just head over to the JavaScript file here with the find the largest number function within it. And to get started, what we're going to do is we'll first create a new variable called largest number. That's going to be responsible for just containing the largest number within the array, and we know that at the end of the function we're going to want to return that largest number. Now, when we initialize this largest number, people might be inclined to give it a starting position of 0. Just be aware that the array can contain negative numbers, so you actually want to not start with 0, otherwise it won't actually catch anything that's a number lower than 0, so you'll end up with failing tests there. So what we're going to do instead is we're actually going to start with the first item within the array of numbers, and that'll give us a starting point for what the initial largest number is, which will just be the first item within the array. And then what we'll do is we'll just create a nice for loop which will take the array of numbers, and for each item within the array, which we'll call a number, we'll take an operation against that, and what that will do is we'll check to see if the number is greater than the largest number that we already have stored, and if it is, then we will change the largest number to be equal to the number within the array. So it'll iterate over all of them, compare the number that's in the array. If it's larger than the current one that we have, then it'll just replace it with that one. So now that that's done, we'll run through the tests again just to make sure that's working okay, and it is, which is great. And that'll be, in my opinion, that's quite a nice, easy to read, easy to follow solution. You can see that we're starting with the first item in the array, we're iterating over it, and then we're returning it. So it's really, really easy and simple to read. Now, saying that, there are a couple of other options that you've got for working through this challenge, and I'll show you another one of those now. If you know that the array of items is going to be quite limited in size, then you can actually make use of there's a built-in function for math called max, which will return the maximum or the largest number given a set of numbers that are passed into the function. Now, you can't just pass in the array like this, because it's actually expecting each of the numbers to be passed in as individual arguments. So, like so. Instead, what we can actually do, there's a handy little thing that you can do within JavaScript, which is known as a spread operator. And a spread operator will allow you so you can pass in the array, but if you put 3 dots at the beginning of the array, what it'll do is it'll spread each of those arguments within the array and separate them all out so that they're individual functional parameters. And what we can then do is we can just return math.max with the array. And what you'll notice is that passes all of our tests. So that's 2 ways of doing it. There is a third way, which is a little bit more advanced, and that is using what's known as a reduce function. Now, a reduce function is quite a special way of working with things. It essentially a reduce function will iterate over an array, and it'll have two arguments. It'll have an accumulator, which is the result of that function on the previous item within the array, and then a value, which is the current item within the array. So what that would look like if you were to work with it is you'd have array.reduce, and within the reduce function, within the reduce call, you'd have another function which takes an accumulator and a value, and then from that we can then call math.max on the accumulator and the value. And what that will effectively do is every time this iterates over the array, the new accumulator will be the maximum of the current accumulator or the value. So that will allow you to determine whether the next value is going to be larger than the current value, and it will work in that way. So if we run the test against that particular implementation as well, you'll notice that we get 3 tests passing. So that's 3 options. In my opinion, I quite like the simplicity of the first iteration because it's quite easy to see what's going on there. You don't have to get your head around what this reduce function is doing, and this math.max, if the array is really, really large, then it could end up causing issues and won't actually work as you're expecting. So this one doesn't have that issue, and neither does the reduce. I just tend to find that functions that are quite well laid out with nice variables tend to be easier to read in the long run. But once you're done, just save your code. You should be good to go.